Part 1, Chapter 11 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. The Christian Defenders. We now come to a brighter picture. The writing in defense of Christianity is called the Apology, and the writer an apologist. It is from the Greek word apologia, which meant a work written for resistance. But the apologies of the early Church were more than this. They were not only counter-arguments, but aggressive weapons. It was a fierce warfare upon the enemy's camp, followed by a hot pursuit. There were two classes of apologists, the Greek and the Latin, according to the territory in which they occupied and the language in which they wrote. But there were further differences. The Greeks belonged mostly to the 2nd century, and their writings exhibited a profound intimacy with the Greek philosophy. Some of them had studied in the Greek schools, and entered the Church only in mature life. They endeavored to prove that Christianity was the blossom of all that was valuable in every system. They stood largely on the defensive. The Latins, on the other hand, were aggressive. They lived mostly in the 3rd century, were more argumentative, wrote in a clearer and more methodical style, and carried the warfare into the hostile ranks with an energy equal to the Roman soldier on foreign battlefields. Their perspective of Christianity was that of universal conquest and permanent dominion. The principal Greek apologists were Aristo, Quadratus, Aristides, Justin, Melito, Miltiades, Irenaeus, Athenagoras, Tatian, Clement of Alexandria, Hippolytus, and Origen. Aristo's dialogue between Papiskos and Jason was an attempt to prove the truth of Christianity and the messiahship of Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Quadratus addressed an apology to Hadrian, A.D. 131, with a view to stop the persecutions of the Christians. Aristides proved Christianity the culmination of the best systems in the classic world, and the one which should supersede all else. Justin wrote 2 apologies, A.D. 136 and A.D. 162, showing that the Christians were not responsible for public calamities, that they were true Roman citizens, that pagan philosophy and mythology abound in falsehood and contradiction, and that the only source of truth is the Scriptures. Athenagoras, in his Embassy of the Christians, applied a philosophical method to Christian defense. Tatian, who died about A.D. 176, wrote an address to the Greeks, showing the ridiculous origin of the Greek religion and science. Clement, in his Pedagogue and the Stromata, exposed the emptiness of the whole pagan fabric. Hippolytus wrote against the pagans, the Platonic philosophy, and the Jews. Origen, born A.D. 185, wrote a work consisting of 8 books against Celsus, in which he exposed the weakness of the whole pagan structure. Tertullian stands at the head. His Apologeticus, written about A.D. 200, is the most brilliant piece of apologetic writing in the early Church. He showed that persecution was no final damage to the Christians. His other writings covered nearly every contested point. The supernatural element in Christianity was brought by him into great prominence, and defended with masterly skill. Cyprian wrote about the middle of the 3rd century. His attack on pagan idolatry was merciless, and could not be answered. Arnobius, about A.D. 303, surpassed all the apologists in his use of the miracles of Jesus as a weapon of Christian attack. Lactantius, the Christian Cicero, wrote his Divine Institutions, A.D. 320. Footnote: the date here, A.D. 320, is of the 2nd edition, addressed to Constantine. It was written 307 to 310, or perhaps earlier. End footnote. His strength lay less in the force of his argument than in the purity and beauty of his style. The objection that Christians were disloyal to the state was met by the answer that they were true to the emperor, obeyed all laws which did not interfere with Christianity, never conspired against the government, and never produced robbers, assassins, or traitors. Purity of life was proven as the outgrowth of pure doctrines. Tertullian said, "We live a life free from reproach. We live among you. You can see us every day." To the charge that natural calamities were produced by the Christians, he replied, "Why do you suffer too? Why do your gods let you have these trials?" The inspiration of the Scriptures and purity of doctrine were fundamental arguments in all the apologetic writings. To these came the divine character of Jesus. When the assailants repelled the miraculous power of Jesus, the apologists replied, "Do you not say that your Aesculapius restores the lame and the halt, that your Orpheus, Zeno, and Cleanthes know the Logos, and that Plato, in a letter to Hermias and Coriscus, speaks of a Son of God?" The purity of Christian morals was held up by the apologists in striking antagonism to the sensuality of paganism, which could produce only caricatures of good morals. The origin of the pagan gods was exposed with fearless skill. The apologists said, with Tatian, "What has become of your Juno, that she produces no more gods?" Arnobius said, defiantly, "Your gods abound in passion. Some are drunkards, others are murderers, and multitudes are licentious." When this battle of 3 centuries was over, it was easy to see that the victory of the Christian writers was complete. It began with the pagan expectation of destroying the logical basis of Christianity, but ended by the exposure of the corruption of the Greek and Roman faith and the weakness of the boasted philosophy. Every department of Christian truth was defended by the apologists. Their arguments broke down the opposition, while they constitute a storehouse of Christian defense to which all later Christian writers have appealed with success. The indirect service of the attacks to the Church was great, in that all Christians were compelled to study the groundwork of Christianity on every side. The laity were driven to read their Bible. The private member, over all Christendom, could give a reason for the faith that was in him. By the end of the 5th century the conflict was over. The apologists were the last to leave the field. The Christian now lived in a larger place. He was marching on to universal conquest. The words of one of the apologists expressed the attitude of all believers. "Every country is the Christian's fatherland, and every fatherland is the Christian's country." End of section 11.